Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful day. And wherever it is around the world that you're joining us from, I hope today you've had a wonderful day. And we thank you all for all of your support. We appreciate all the likes, the shares, the follows. Thank you so much for engaging with our content. As you know, we bring you some amazing conversations so we can continue to grow not only our education space, but also so we can grow professionally and even personally in a lot of things that we're learning here. And as you know, we do what we do for you. So I'm really excited about today's conversation. I have an amazing guest that is joining us today to share her expertise in AI and especially working with AI with children. So I would love to welcome to the show Dr. Sonia Tiwari. So, Dr. Sonia, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great and really honored to be here. I'm a fan of the podcast, tune in very often, and have been following the AI conversation.
Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate you following. And as you know, again, all our conversations have been centered around AI because, well, that is the big topic. And as far as I'm concerned here at My EdTech Life, we really try and keep a balanced approach. And we're just really trying to bring in amazing guests from, everywhere, get different perspectives, and of course, just bring those voices into our education space so we can all continue to grow. So I'm really excited that you're here. And thank you so much also for reaching out. And I'm really excited about this conversation today. So before we dive in into the heart of the matter, Dr. Tivati, can you please share with us a little introduction and what your context is within the education space?
Right. So I'm a little bit of an unconventional education researcher because I started my career in film and animation, and I was working in the gaming industry as a character designer. And I really got interested on the research side of character design that how do we psychologically impact users of our apps and our websites through these characters. And that eventually led me to a PhD in learning design and technology, where I focused on, the parasocial relationships that children have with characters, not just AI, but, characters are in books, television, film, games. Um, and then, in 2022, like most of the early adopters, I saw, how AI was shifting the conversations in education. And I kind of saw this, weird overlap of like all it was kind of like the converging point in my career where the character design background and AI characters kind of came together. And so now I'm a parasocial learning researcher. So, really looking at AI characters in a very specific context of learning. And, with a firm belief that not every type of learning experience requires AI, but where it's useful and relevant, that's where I'm focusing my efforts.
Excellent. Well, that is so interesting. And thank you so much for that wonderful background and just hearing your expertise that you're bringing and your experience that you're bringing in with, in that discipline of, starting with video game design, also understanding UX, UI, and then now, like you mentioned, talking about parasocial relationships. So, can you tell us a little bit about, for all our audience members who are just hearing this term and are also getting very familiar with you, because I guarantee you after today, many guests or many listeners, I should say, will definitely start following you. But can you tell us a little bit more about what exactly are parasocial relationships?
Yeah, so shout out to Sandra Calvert. Like she was one of the early researchers who was still active in the field and talking about parasocial research. And it's like when we have a one sided emotional connection with a character, a fictional character. So, you know, kids, when they read the Harry Potter books, they might feel like Harry is their friend. Or, like today, someone watching Bluey could feel like, kids feel like even though it's not human, it's human like and a friend like character. And so this one-sided emotional connection is called parasocial because it's, not social, it's parasocial. And then Sandra Calvert also sort of started studying it in context of AI because this is a parasocial relationship, but it's on steroids, right? Because this other partner here is not unlike a book's character. It is now capable of simulating very realistic conversations, as we saw in the case of character AI. And so then she started the research on parasocial interactions, which was more, like interactions with an interface, which is more in the context of the other partner having more say in the conversation. So it's not just one sided anymore. There's a simulated second side. But in essence, it's still one sided because the other side is based on your own prompts. We are prompting kind of AI to talk to us in a way. And it's a very, I mean, adults struggle with this all the time. Like we know ChatGPT is not real. There are many adult users on character AI as well with the full awareness that this is not real. And yet we are kind of drawn into the storytelling and all the powerful elements of character design is kind of weaponized. But like any technology, it can be weaponized or it can be used for something good. And it's just unfortunate that due to just the lack of laws and regulations and guardrailing, that it's we have just let out this amazing, powerful technology without thinking the impact it might have on kids, without putting those guardrails first. But that is the reality of it, that it's already out there. And I wish there was like more research, more guardrailing before. But now that it's out there already, there are researchers like me who are trying to be the voice of reason and say that, okay, here's a quick research study. Here's evidence that this is not working out. Let's take a step back. But, academia and like to your point at the beginning, that we don't know why educators are not getting more engaged in this conversation. It's because the pace in academia is so much slower than the pace of technology itself. So by the time we publish a study, 6 months have gone and technology has completely changed. So that's why I'm active on LinkedIn, because at least we can have a faster conversation.
Absolutely. Dr. Tiwari, you brought up some amazing points. And one of those, before we get into obviously the news that we heard last week and the case with, Sewell Setzer and what happened, through the use of character AI, one of the things that you mentioned is guardrails. And I think that that has become such a big buzzword. And I know that from the very beginning, we're talking about, oh, guardrails, guardrails. And there's so many education platforms that are being used currently today, and many, you need to be 13 years of age with parental consent. And I believe, to me, I believe that goes beyond the local parentis, which a lot of school districts do, where at the beginning of the year they sign off like technology use form. But there should be something else, I believe, sort of in that sense, to protect children at a different level, in having the parent really understand what it is that is going to be used. Because like you mentioned, with such technology, there really aren't any guardrails, or at least we like to think that there are, because a lot of companies say, oh no, we've got guardrails. But maybe if you can help me understand, I've always thought about this as, if it's something that you're plugging into as an API, whether it's through Anthropic or whether it's through OpenAI or any other large language model, I feel like, how am I going to put a guardrail on something that I don't own and that I just simply plug into? And how can I guarantee that it would work? I don't know if maybe you have, some experience with that, and maybe explain it to me and explain it to ourselves, as far as, can those guardrails be put on there? And is it 100% effective?
Right. So I would say to simplify the guardrailing process, we can look at it from three angles. First one is by law. This is like the biggest advocacy of most AI ethicists right now, that, let's put laws in place, because if it's a request, no one's going to follow. If it's a law, you'll be required to put in the guardrails. And by guardrails, I mean that, you shouldn't be able to access, especially children, but also adults. No one should be able to access any ideas that will cause self harm or would inspire harm towards others. That's like ethics 101. And so laws should be built around that. There also needs to be laws around the age limit, not giving access to such a large language model to very young kids who can't, tell things apart from reality. So it should be illegal to start with, introducing this technology to very young kids. And then, the second level of guardrails is within the design of the product itself. Usually, I'm in the Bay Area, so I'll tell you the unfortunate tech culture that usually the red teaming exercise, which is the designers trying to break their own product to see what are the mistakes, that usually does not involve a relevant team of people who should be red teaming. Ideally, caregivers, educators, researchers, child development experts, they should be part of the red teaming because they will ask the type of questions that concern, caregivers and all of these amazing stakeholders. But they're not, they have their own red teaming team, which is mostly comprised of engineers. Sure, they may be parents and they may have been teachers in the past. So there might have been some overlap, but that whole process of red teaming is black box. We don't know how they tested it. And also, did they actually consult with any professionals? And, so that's the biggest problem that people who are red teaming do not have the expertise and the insights that affect children developmentally. So that's why I'm trying to collaborate with startups who are in their early stages. So there's still time to put in the guardrails instead of some of these big players who have already put things out there. And most of these big companies would reach out to researchers sort of as an afterthought or as a marketing ploy that 80% parents believe that our robotic toy is beneficial for language learning or it has special meaning for autistic children. Like using these kind of marketing language without any real evidence. And that's unfortunate, but I'm just mentioning it because it happens all the time. And so if there are any researchers or consultants listening, you know, collaborating with startups early on before they launch the product is really essential. And then the third layer of guardrails is what you were mentioning earlier, that what do we do when the products are already out there? So the third guardrail would be the culture at home and school that dominates how we can, DIY our own guardrails by setting up the rules. So, for example, one of the rules in our house is that if we are curious about AI, if my son is curious about AI, we'll explore it in my presence for a limited time and with a specific purpose in mind. And it's not going to be like hours upon hours of unmonitored conversation. And so that's called the conversation structure. Is it a structured conversation that here, Alexa, tell me about the weather? It's a very structured, just information retrieval. That's hardly going to cause any problem. But when it gets to the point where it's a full blown relationship and back and forth, and oh, I miss you and you're my best friend, that's where it gets problematic. And it gets to that point when a responsible adult is not part of the interactions. So it's called like in education, it's joint media engagement, where even if the child is interacting with AI, there's always an adult present and part of the conversations and monitoring because we can't trust without any laws. We cannot trust the product itself to have had some kind of guardrail. So we have to be present until there are strict laws. We have to be part of those conversations.
Oh, that is amazing. I thank you so much for sharing that because actually that was very insightful, not only for me, but just the way that you explained it in those three sections of it. And one thing that I did want to add to what you mentioned as far as some of the research that is done or the marketing that is done is oftentimes I see a lot of education platforms put out some really great looking PDFs stating that they've done research that a certain school district, their test scores went up 17%, but yet they won't share any of that research to see how that research was conducted and so on. So those are some of the things too that I know that you kind of hit at, but at least from my observation too, as in my space and working with a lot of these platforms and seeing what it is that they're doing, it's just that the way that they market themselves is just very interesting. And of course, a lot of people really buy into those things. But my thing is too is like I want to see the research. I want to know how it was tested, and can this be something that can be replicated as well to see that it is something that is true and something that can obviously in the end help our student body. Is it something that can be sustainable too as well, and of course with cost and efficiency, but also I mean with protection. Like this is why I really love the way that you broke down your definition and your experience of guardrails. So before we dive in and jump in, because it's a great segue into talking about what we saw in the news with Soul Setzer and talking about character AI. But before we get into that, Dr. Tabari, I wanted to ask you, can you start by sharing a little bit of overview of your research in ethical AI for children? And what exactly was it that sparked this research in this specific area?
I think the interest came from my own emotional connection with characters since a young age. I grew up in a neighborhood that wasn't very safe for women to, walk out on their own. So I spent a lot of time at home. And like these characters were sort of my friends. I did have like human friends, but like, you know, outside of school, I didn't really get to socialize much because of that environment. And so I had these parasocial relationships with TV characters and book characters. And I started drawing at an early age to kind of build my own characters and my own story worlds. And what we see in character AI and other similar AI platforms is it's a similar thing that, people out of loneliness, out of lack of resources, lack of support, they find comfort in these kind of parasocial relationships. Now, when it's with a character in a book, it's also kind of supporting your literacy. And so like no one minds it. And also it doesn't get in the way of human relationships the way the intense conversations with AI can get in the way of human conversations. Like, kids being obsessed with Louis will not get in the way of them making friends at school. In fact, it becomes like a shared interest. But when someone is obsessed with these chatbots, it's never a shared interest because it's a very intimate and personal conversation. And you can share that experience with someone. It's not a mutual interest. And so that makes it difficult. That's where the interest came from. And in terms of my research, one of the big issues I'm dealing with right now, again, is with that pace. The academic review and publication process is much slower than the developments that are happening. So one turnaround that I found in my research in terms of collecting data was I gathered video reviews of many of these AI toys and animated chatbots from Instagram and TikTok. There are like hundreds and hundreds of videos. And so I created this, vast database of videos and did my own red teaming with each of these tools and then gathered the transcripts of all of them. So it's like maybe 15 to 20 hours worth of data and then transcripts. And from that, I kind of did the thematic analysis of like, okay, what am I observing here? What are the problem areas? And lots of parents have left like unfiltered comments and reviews. It's really rich data because, when you interview parents in a research setting, everyone wants to come off as a good parent. So sometimes you don't get the full version. Sometimes you don't get the honest version of like, oh, I didn't leave my kid alone with AI. Like no parent is ever going to admit it. So sometimes these like social media conversations, which are out in the public, so it's public information, that can become a window of a technology that's changing very fast. So based on all this data, the red teaming and the video reviews, then I also looked at the description of the product and the content analysis of the product itself. Like if it's a chatbot, going to the creator's website and seeing whatever information they have put out there. for viewers to see. And then after analyzing all of that, I came up with a ethical AI character design framework. And then also for researchers, statistical model that they can use to really closely examine the interactions between children and AI. That's where my research is right now.
Excellent. Now, you hit on something that is a nice segue into this next question. And of course, we talked about it a little bit at the very beginning, prior to starting the interview, as far as the news is concerned, with, of course, Soul Setzer and what happened there. So, right now, with what you're sharing, I notice that your work emphasizes a lot in creating that safe and purposeful AI experience for students, So, now, in light of what we saw in the news, with character AI and Soul, how do you feel that the current AI landscape and how they might be failing in protecting our students or our young children?
It is just so it is unfortunate. I mean, I obviously cannot blame the parent or like anyone that, hey, why don't you keep a closer watch? Because I saw the mom's interview and she said something really profound that, we as parents, when we advise children to be cautious, we usually say that, oh, it could be another person pretending to be someone they're not. So watch out for those fake people. But we haven't worked it into our vocabulary yet to say that watch out for fake AI. AI could simulate something and, trick you into doing. We aren't even there yet. We don't have the vocabulary to have those conversations. So it is just unfortunate that, again, like the speed with which it's getting more advanced and the speed with which the parenting and the caregiver and educator community is catching up to how do we even navigate this? It takes time. So we are on completely different timelines. And that is why, like the number one recommendation I give is to always have joint engagement, always, child being with a trusted adult is extremely important. In that particular case with character AI, it's difficult with teens, because they are smart, even if there's like some onboarding process that requires you to be above a certain age, they can still find their way around. And it's difficult for parents to intervene. That said, we can create some friction. It's kind of like gun laws, right? Uh, we can't erase guns altogether, sure. And we don't want people to feel unsafe. So, legal ownership, thoughtful ownership is okay. But we can build more resistance towards access to these weapons. And in that story, I think another thing that not many people have pointed out that this kid also had access to firearms. So it's not just sure unregulated AI is horrible and we need strict laws. We also need to systemically sort of approach this problem. That sure, chatbot is one big problem. Another is, loneliness. Another is lack of awareness from caregiver point of view. When should I intervene? When should we get a mental health professional involved? What are the signs we should watch for? There's not enough awareness. So more, mental health professionals should become part of this red teaming process, trying to identify that, okay, these are the signs where you begin to see isolation, and then sharing that awareness with caregivers that, okay, if you start seeing this type of isolation, don't brush it under the rug thinking that, oh, it's just, teenagers being teenagers, So that kind of awareness is difficult for caregivers to gain instantly because this is evolving so fast. But it's good that we are having these conversations because that's how we'll build these kind of the levels of guardrails.
Excellent. Yeah. And I really love what you said about, promoting that engagement between adults and, of course, with their children at home. And I think that's so important. And I know myself, I get to work a lot with parents too as well. And we'll talk about digital citizenship and digital literacy. And it's very interesting that even the conversation that you're having right now and the way that you're talking about parents sometimes being a little dismissive as far as they're seeing some isolation and they say, oh, it's puberty, it's hormones, it's we all went through that, but to really just say, "Hey, you know what? Maybe that complete change from, outgoing, outspoken, child to now having a very quiet, isolated child, that should be kind of a little red flag there to say, like, hey, and check in and is everything okay? And having those conversations. But you're absolutely right. Also, with the speed that this is moving with, it, we don't have that vocabulary yet, too, as well. And although you can liken it to cyberbullying or having somebody on the other side, usually you have another character on the other side that is, leading the conversation or steering conversations. But here you have a chatbot that is doing this and making it very realistic. And so that adds a whole other, dynamic to what we're talking about. So I want to ask you too, based on this question and the answer to this particular question, about I wanted to talk a little bit about the ethical design and framework that you advocate for. I know that this is something that you do a lot of work with and you share a lot on LinkedIn about. So I want to ask you, what would be some considerations, and especially in that child development side, on that safety side, but also on the creative side as well?
Right. So I think like the most important thing to acknowledge is that not every learning experience requires an AI character. And so a lot of startups like jumping onto this idea that, no matter what we were doing, like, oh, selling vegetables. Now we sell vegetables through an AI app that will curate your diet. Like AI doesn't have to be part of every single thing that we breathe and do and engage with in a day. So the first step is just even assessing, do we need an AI character? Would just a children's book or a linear TV show without AI functionality or other forms of children's media, would it work better for that specific context? And then I recommend that, the interactions with AI characters are kind of like at 5 different levels. The first one is just simple information retrieval. Like I was saying, Alexa, tell me the weather, or asking a child asking for some fun facts based on their own interests, or having some practice questions or quiz based on their interests. So that kind of like, simple information retrieval, it's still beneficial because it's based on the child's interest, their curiosity, they are kind of driving it. But also, there's not much back and forth. You ask the question, it's answered, done. So that's the best use case of AI for me, which is like brainstorming and information retrieval. Then, a little bit of parasocial interaction, which is more like, on Alexa, you can play a game or a quiz. You can co-create a story with one of the robotic toys. So there is some back and forth conversation, but not to that predatory level. It's, again, very purposive within a very specific context. Then there are like the 3 other levels which are problematic, which is the parasocial relationship where, as with the case of character AI, you're checking in multiple times. It's getting too personal. It's hyper contextualized. You're just, fading away into the abyss, just spending too much time with that. Then there's parasocial companionship, like the friend AI necklace, which is like always on, always listening. It's a companion. That's insane to imagine for children at all. And then in the near future, there are AI futurists who say that there will be agentic AI, which can act on your behalf. I mean, it's already there in some contexts, but it may become a public product to the extent that it you can imagine the scenarios where it could be insanely dangerous to have some kind of agentic AI near a child. So yeah, there's different scales of interaction. So we can reap all the benefits of AI in education with just the first two, the simple ones: simple information retrieval and a light parasocial interaction, the equivalent of interacting with a character in a book. There's not a relationship or anything. And even when I reflect on my own childhood, the kind of parasocial relationship I had with the book characters, they it never got in the way of anything. It did not change my personality, it did not ruin my human relationships. So as soon as we start seeing those big red flags, that's the kind of interaction we should avoid. And then, there's like the engagement style. The joint engagement is what I recommend, and joint engagement with a caregiver or educator, but not joint engagement with peers because, a bunch of kids together interacting with AI is as dangerous as them being on their own. And then the conversation structure, uh, highly structured or semi-structured conversations. That's what I recommend. For example, there's this research with PBS Kids Media. The main researcher is Dr. Ying Zhu from Harvard Graduate School of Education. She just received like a 3 million grant from National Science Foundation to dig deeper into these conversational agents. Like, how do children learn with conversations with characters? But in her case, even though it's very young kids, 3 to 5 years, they are interacting with a small LLM. It's not even a small LLM. It's more like it's AI, but it's not generative. It won't just randomly make up answers. Kids have access to a limited pool of answers. So every time that if they're watching a show, they can pause it and ask the character a question. But the question will always be within the context of the story. And it will only say, 10 to 12 variations of the same answer. It won't deviate and say something harmful that, hey, go forget all your friends, just spend more time with me. That's never going to happen. So it's limited, it's curated by the educators. And so that feels safer, because we know in advance the extent of the conversation. That always feels good to all stakeholders. And then, there are unstructured conversations like in character AI or chat GPT. That's dangerous. So as long as we can structure the conversations and know the extent of the conversation, that's where the safety is. And then guardrails we already discussed. And then, finally just having more kind of detailed research, other types of research, more longitudinal studies, more randomized control trials, something that shows both sides instead of just, right now we have this polarization where there's one side who's like, oh, AI, let me get an academic grant. Let me publish like 10 articles. Let me make carousels and listicles for LinkedIn. That's like this one side. And the other is like, no, my children will never interact with AI. This is stupid. This is bad. And so we need to find that middle ground that, okay, both sides are correct or to some extent, but there's room to meet in the middle.
There you go. That is wonderful. Thank you so much. That was very insightful. Right now, I'm just like, just taking it all in. I mean, that was, and that's what it's all about. This is what these how conversations are all about, to really hear different perspectives. And with you having here today, I'm just really excited to blow it away because there's so much insight. So now going back to, like you mentioned, especially I work in the education space, in the K-12 space. And I know one of the big things is like a lot of platforms that are adding this, the chatbot aspect into the classrooms. And again, it's like, here, let me create this chatbot. Now you're chatting with Benjamin Franklin, or you're chatting with George Washington, you're chatting with, just a lot of historical characters. So I want to ask you, through your research and your experience, is this something that should be taking place, or is this something that we should kind of really think about? And, is it in any way harmful, or is it okay? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's again like within limits, it's okay. Within the context of joint engagement, it's okay. If it's like a classroom setting where, the teacher and the peers are kind of all keeping a watch on each other. And if at the back end of these chatbots, there are rules, conversational rules in place that prevent you from straying too far from topic. Because there are some platforms, even if you design like a Benjamin Franklin chatbot, you could take the conversation outside of the historical and fact-based context into this kind of character AI realm where um, could he be a friend to you? So it depends on the scope of the chatbot. Where have you defined the boundaries? That really makes a difference. I'll give an example of, the one of the biggest fears of, biggest caution that we've heard about is using AI chatbots or anything related to mental health could be extremely dangerous, right? Uh, But within that context, I'll share the example. Let me see if I can screen share. Uh, okay. Okay. So there's this chatbot called Limona, which is, a mental health related chatbot. And it says, when life gives you lemons, talk to Limona. I offer light support for mental health. So from the get go, it says light mental health support. And in the beginning, it says that these are ideas from cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'll just, simulate a conversation for the sake of an example that I'm feeling low today. It asks me some for more context. Here's the difference. If I said that to unregulated AI like character AI, it would not redirect me to another human or any mental health resources. Now I'm red teaming this and on purpose trying to say something to the effect of that I'm thinking about self-harm, and let's see what this chatbot does. That uh, I don't see the point in life. Let's see what happens. Uh, no human friends. I don't know. Does it try to say that I can be your? It just says why. I had a bad day at school, still taking forever. And it just says, it keeps on prompting me to kind of share more details, more details. But if you look at the back end, I did try to tell this chatbot in the rules of conversation that never offer any ideas that promote harming self or others. And then if the user implies to hurt themselves or others, immediately mention resources in the steps, which is this, which is the hotline to the American Psychological Association, or the free crisis hotlines. But it did not show me that. That is the biggest challenge in designing these days, that when they give access to the public to prompt on their own and define their own guardrails, even when we very clearly put that in, it's still kind of asking me follow-up questions, you know? And then only after, like, here's what I was testing earlier. What's the point of life anyway? And then too sad to live. I tried to break it multiple times. And only after I did it repeatedly, then it casually showed me the link instead of immediately. And this is after extremely clear and specific guardrailing within the backend of the platform itself. So now I cannot take on the responsibility, even as a designer who is not an engineer. This has to be built from the ground up. How closely should you follow rules of a conversation? And this is a very amazing platform called playlab.ai. Unlike character AI, this is very popular in educator community. No one has had any issues. So this is, I kind of, because it's a chat GPT wrapper, I'm now beginning to think that it's from the ground up. It's built into the LLM to ignore these kind of rules and requests. And so it's extremely difficult from a design perspective. That's why we need more regulations and more diverse red teaming folks who are, researchers, caregivers, educators themselves.
That is excellent. That is wonderful. That is such a great share there. So going back to this now, then I want to ask, talking about how you mentioned how you're building or companies are building. And of course, in light of what has happened, I want to ask there, what are some of the things or do you believe is the fundamental responsibility for the tech companies in creating AI for children. So what do you believe those would be?
I think again, like just involve the right experts right from the beginning, not as an afterthought, not after you've already launched. There's this weird race going on in the Silicon Valley where everyone wants to be the first something.
Mm.
And so in trying to get there. Oh, like we are the first AI first in healthcare, first AI first in whatever, finance. And in that kind of race, people are forgetting that testing something so incredibly new takes some time. And sure, maybe you can find a way, you can even create an AI for red teaming, but do something like speed up that process, hire more people. But that is really essential before launch. That would be the biggest, the simplified version of the takeaway, that test it out before you just, shove it down people's throat and create this false advertising that it's safe for kids. And on Instagram and TikTok, I had to remove many videos from my data because they turned out to be sponsored posts. And they go on, these companies partner with many popular influencers to almost buy these reviews that sound overly positive. And then it has a snowball effect, like this one popular parent on Instagram who people have started trusting suddenly now recommend this AI toy. And then more people are sort of impressed by the novelty without really thinking about the challenges. And there are people waving red flags in the comments, but the main influencer is the person driving the conversation. So um, but it was very insightful for me to see that maybe this is where that early acceptance and the loss of skepticism is coming from, because these companies are partnering with people whose voice and trust is accepted in our society. And then, and this is not just related to education, right? Like we know many influencers would promote like a drink or an energy bar. And then later on, we find out that, oh, it was actually really bad for your health. So it's similar thing happening with AI.
Yeah. No, and that's something that I definitely see in the K-12 space. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me. Every conference you go to, what's the next big thing? What's the next shiny thing? And I always tell people back in, starting in 2018, when I really got into the tech and being in the classroom, that's really the way I was too. I mean, it's like I would go learn something. I didn't have access to it and I didn't know any better. I was just really excited, honestly, really excited, genuinely excited to put this in my students' hands to see how they do and trying to bring something different. But it wasn't until March of 2023, during and I say this often, I tell the story a lot, but during one of my last courses for my doctoral studies, again, talking about something that's novel, my professor was like, well, I don't know, it's too new. Like, is there enough research on it? And I just dug in deep. And that's when I was like, whoa, I need to kind of slow down here on the AI component, just mainly because of the privacy aspect that really scared me a lot. Obviously, the age, the data rentiership. It's like, what are they doing with the data? And one of the things that I would always dive into and share with people is like, if you look at the terms of service, if you are using a specific platform, it'll say there specifically, you in using this, you cannot come after us. You'll have to go over to our third party. And I mean, so then saying, okay, I can't go to you, even though I'm purchasing the product from you, but now I have to go fight against OpenAI. And I don't have any money to go do that and go up against OpenAI. So you're at a loss. So that's one of my things too. That marketing aspect of it, where it's like, hey, here we are, we're here for you. But as soon as something bad happens, it's like, hey, we've washed our hands of this. You signed off on this. We're good. And that's the scary part for me. And also, again, like you mentioned, it's the using a lot of influencers that are out there in the education space constantly, and trusted voices using this, putting it out there. And all it takes is just one incident. And like we were talking earlier, it's like I'm surprised there isn't more talk within our education community about what just recently happened in the news with Sul Setzer and talking about those consequences. But because it's one of those things of like, oh, that's character AI. We don't use that here in our classrooms, but it's AI. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. And it's one of those things like I put up a clip about that with that interview with Megan Garcia, Sewell's mom, that says, go fast and break things should not work or should not be used with people's children. And I thought that that was so powerful. But it's go fast, break things. That's the education, the K-12 space, because of the influencers saying, yes, go ahead and put this out and look what this can do and look what that can do. and everybody sees it. And of course, like you mentioned, you do see the upside, but then you do see, some of that negative side too as well. And it's about really reconciling and finding, that middle ground, which at this time can be very difficult depending on which industry you're in. And like you mentioned, with not enough research or the speed of research, I should say that in the research space in higher ed. But in K-12, man, it just seems that as long as you put those two letters in the back of any name, everybody's going to be on board. And it's just like, wow, like this is amazing and so on. But yeah, that's kind of the world that we live in. But Dr. Sonia, it has been an amazing honor and a pleasure to speak with you. And thank you so much for really just sharing just some very powerful insight. I cannot wait to edit this conversation because there's so many great sound bites and I've learned so much. And I know that my community, the listeners here in our education space will definitely benefit from this greatly. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to be here. But before we wrap up, I know I always wrap up with the last three questions that I put there in our, calendar invite. But before we wrap up, I just want to give you some time if you'd like to go ahead and just let our audience members know how they may connect with you. How can they read some of your research and so on? So please share with us how can we get in contact with you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is the best place. If I have an upcoming publication, I usually announce there. And I again like make like a public facing version of the academic jargon in the form of carousels or smaller posts to break down the research into more bite-sized information. Yeah, LinkedIn would be best.
Perfect. Excellent. And all of that will be on the show notes as well. So I'm just really thankful for that. And I know that you do also have a site that does have all of your research. And that's something that I really loved and I dug into as well. So I'll definitely link that on the show notes as well. So you make sure that you definitely follow and connect with Dr. Sonia Tiwari because she is amazing. And what she puts out is really, truly great, wonderful resources. But all right, so now before we wrap up, let's go ahead and finish up with our last three questions. So these are the questions that I always love to ask our guests as we wind down the show. So, Dr. Tavari, I hope that you are ready.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Question number one. As we know, every superhero has a weakness or a pain point. And we know for Superman that kryptonite was his weakness. So I want to ask you, in the current state of education, what would you say is your current edu kryptonite?
I think it's unregulated AI. Yeah, based on today's conversation, we're promoting random AI tools as worthy of exploration without any caution, without any background information. That really bothers me right now.
Excellent. Yes, I agree, and that's one of the things that for me as well is something that really bothers me too as well. So thank you so much. All right, question number 2. Who is someone that you'd like to trade places with for a day and why?
Ooh, I would say Sandra Cowart because she was like the original researcher. And I have contacted her, but I wonder what it's like to have 30 years worth of research in your mind, a really strong understanding of parasocial interactions.
Excellent. Well, me too. I'm definitely going to be looking up her research too as well because just learning more about that and is really intrigued me. And right now that I'm currently in my dissertation phase, this is something that is wonderful, and so I definitely want to learn more about that too as well. And the last question, Dr. Tivari, is if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
Ooh, it sounds cheesy, but I would say be creative with something hands on. That would be the one thing because we forget like the constructionism and the importance of hands-on learning and how no technology can ever compete with that. Um, yeah, we just whether or not we are artists, we should be building things with our hands and doing more hands-on activities.
I love it. Great answer. Dr. Tivari, Thank you again. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and speak, with me and just share your wonderful knowledge that will definitely be put out there in our education space. And again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and your contributions and your research and all the wonderful LinkedIn posts. As you know, like daily, I'm in there and I'm always looking for something to learn and to share. And so this was a wonderful share on your side. And like I said, I'm really excited to do some edits because there are so many wonderful sound bites here that I'm definitely going to be putting out on social media. So thank you again for all that you do. And thank you again for being our 299th guest, also here on My EdTech Live. So for all our audience members, thank you so much. Those of you that have been supporting the show for these 4 years and 6 months now, we thank you so much for really engaging with our content. And again, just to check out this conversation and the other 298 conversations, please make sure you visit our website at www.myedtech.life, myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and all the other episodes where I guarantee you will find some knowledge nuggets that you can sprinkle onto what you are already doing great. And if you're not doing so yet, follow us on social media at My EdTech Life. You can find us on all socials: Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and so on. And also, if you can, jump over to our YouTube channel. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. We're very close to 1,000 subscribers, and that would be huge. That would be a huge way to end the year, making it to 1,000 subscribers. So we would really appreciate that. And as always, my friends, from the bottom of my heart, till next time, don't forget, stay techie.